There's a moment every historian recognizes, when you stumble across a forgotten method or tool from the past and you realize it still works just as well today as it did generations ago. That spark, where history stops being distant and suddenly becomes useful, is exactly why this episode exists. During World War II, millions of soldiers, civilians and resistance fighters had to face brutal winters without reliable electricity, steady fuel supplies or modern heating systems. They didn't have the luxury of waiting for the grid to come back on. Every day was a test of resourcefulness, and many of the tricks they relied on still work, even in our modern world where convenience can disappear with a single blackout. Before we get into it, keep this in mind. These weren't gimmicks or experimental ideas. These were methods forged from necessity, techniques the average person today overlooks because they assume only technology keeps them warm. But some of the most effective heating hacks are the ones that require no power at all, and they're grounded in physics, field experience, and the kind of ingenuity that only hardship produces. So let's get straight into the 9 techniques that deserve a place in any prepper's toolkit. The first technique is using stone as a thermal battery, a method often used by civilians more than soldiers. Stones absorb heat slowly and release it slowly, making them ideal for maintaining warmth long after a fire burns out. In World War II-era farmhouses, people placed river stones and brick chunks around stoves, then wrapped them in cloth and carried them to bed or used them under tables. You can still apply this by placing several fist-sized stones near a wood stove, letting them heat fully, then transferring them into a metal bucket and covering it with a towel. The stones release heat for hours, stabilizing a room even when the fire dies down. The second technique is the trench-style heat channel, rarely used by foot soldiers but widely used by resistance groups sheltering in makeshift dugouts. By digging a shallow channel from an outdoor fire pit to the inside of a shelter and covering the channel with metal or flat stones, they created a passive heating duct. Air warmed by the fire travelled through the trench and rose into the shelter. You can replicate this today on a small scale in an off-grid cabin by building a fire a few feet outside and letting the heated air travel through a narrow covered trench into the interior. It works because warm air naturally rises and seeks escape, pulling fresh air behind it. The third technique is heating through body-powered insulation layering, a method civilians actually mastered better than military units. Now, armies issued wool, sure, but civilians became experts in creating these microclimates inside their clothing. They realized, that air, not the fabric itself, is the real insulator. Layering loosely rather than tightly traps air pockets that slow down heat loss. So, to use this today, avoid compressing your layers. Start with a thin base layer, then a looser mid-layer, and finish with a heavy outer shell. This one technique alone can reduce your need for external heat by quite a surprising margin. The fourth technique is the clay seal draft blocker, which was used heavily in wartime Europe. Homes without proper insulation relied on clay mixed with straw to seal up window cracks. It wasn't pretty, but honestly, it worked well enough to take a room from freezing to livable. These days, you can replicate the effect with modern, removable, non-permanent materials, like homemade flower putty, or even tightly packed paper mixed with water. In a blackout, stopping drafts does far more for warmth than lighting 10 candles ever could. The fifth technique is the WWII kettle steam radiator, and it required no electricity at all. Households would place kettles of boiling water near metal objects, usually cast-iron cookware, or sometimes even metal bed frames. The steam would heat the metal, and then the metal radiated warmth long after the steam had dissipated. You can do the same thing with any metal container, really. Just boil water on a gas or wood stove, put the container a few feet from where people gather, and the radiant heat is, well, surprisingly strong. The sixth technique is pocket-sized fuel bricks made from wastepaper. Civilians rolled newspaper tightly around a rod, soaked the rolls in water, then compressed them until they formed dense logs. These dried and burned slowly, making them perfect backup fuel. Today, with a simple press or clamp, you can turn junk mail into usable heat. Just let the bricks dry thoroughly before burning them in a wood stove or small firebox. The seventh technique is using reflector panels the way prisoner of war escapees did. While soldiers used ponchos and blankets, escapees who hid in barns or cellars often used simple reflective boards to redirect heat from a small flame toward their bodies. You can create a reflector by placing a metal sheet, foil-covered board, or even a reflective survival blanket behind a heat source. It actually doubles the efficiency of any flame because it prevents heat from dispersing into empty space. The eighth technique is the hot water bed warmer, borrowed from pre-industrial Europe and revived during the war. People filled metal or ceramic bottles with boiling water and placed them under blankets an hour before sleep. This warmed the bedding and prevented the dangerous initial cold shock that increases heat loss. These days, a stainless steel bottle filled with hot water works identically and, honestly, can stay warm for hours. The ninth technique is the charcoal sand heater, which was used quietly in many occupied countries. A metal tin filled with a layer of sand and a few chunks of charcoal created a slow, steady heater that produced warmth for hours with minimal smoke. If you recreate this today, always use it in a ventilated area. Light the charcoal outside, let it smoulder to a glow, then place it in the sand. The sand moderates the burn rate and spreads the heat evenly. These techniques aren't romanticized relics. They're functional, field-tested solutions that helped ordinary people survive when the world fell apart. And if there's anything history teaches us, it's that resilience comes from knowledge, not gadgets. If you found this breakdown valuable, subscribe to The Prepper Historian and share this with someone who appreciates real, practical history that still matters today.